Greetings, this is Ebony Sun Goddess, and today we're going to talk about the concept of mentalism and related to your unmeasurability. Another thing we're going to talk about is the basic units of measurement that are normally used in chemistry, such as volume, mass, length, temperature, and energy. Um, we're going to use those two concepts within chemistry and mentalism to explore your unmeasurability so you can better understand yourself and dissect just how vast that you really are. You have to dissect it in order to explore and understand it. First, I want to start us off with a brief part of a poem that I wrote in order to get our minds moving in this direction. Give me a second. With every complaint, with every libation, her tongue elevated his name to God manifestation. Each ritualistic mention creating a new dimension, a new space where he was free to dwell. With each praise to his name, each lament to her friends, every new energy wave transferring to allow his existence to grow and span. It was then she knew she began not knowing what to do. Though he was well-meaning, exciting, and sweet, she started noticing. Little by little, her energy began to seep, as her creation grew feet and by feet. Excuse me. Okay, let's move on to talking about the basic. Well, first let's move on to talking about the concept of mentalism. Okay, according to this concept of mentalism, all is mind. And we live within the energy field of this mind. All is mind. So all things that we see, experience, touch, feel, taste, smell, all of our relationships and all, relations and the way we relate to other people, also is tied into this concept. And all of this, all of the way we relate to other people, all the things that we experience are animated. All things living, all aspects of the living and all aspects of matter are animated by this universal wave of consciousness, this universal brain. As I mentioned, we live within this universal brain and we go through this existence thinking just, that it's just an everyday thing. We don't often, in most cases, we don't understand that we're creating our own reality. So the crux of all of this is, this universal brain, this whole matrix, this whole energy field is animating all life forms and all in their varying degrees and all aspects of life, all realms of life is you. Now, we already know we can create our own reality in certain ways by how we think. We know, people talk about all the time, well, your energy and how you think, kind of makes people react a certain way towards you because of how you feel about yourself and how you think. It attracts people who think a certain way about you. So a lot of times what we're like sometimes what we're doing is we're emitting waves of thought out in the universe, and this is attracting certain life experiences that we sometimes have to experience in order to grow. It's attracting certain people into our life according to how we actually feel about ourselves. So let's go into talking about the basic units of measurement, and we're going to relate these back. First, we're going to talk about the definitions. We're going to define them, and then we're going to talk about the basic units that are used to measure each of these systems, used to quantify each of these systems of measurement on a basic level. Today, we're not going to get too deep off into the more complex way that we affect our reality and manipulate matter. We're just going to talk about this on a very basic level just to introduce it to you so you can understand it. We relate to things first on the physical level. So that's what we're going to do today. And then in later videos, we're going to get deeper. Now, basic units of measurement within chemistry deal with mass, volume, energy, length, and temperature. First volume is defined as, how much space an object takes up. So when you think about mass, when you think about volume, think about how much space you take up in this whole realm of existence. Think about, like how much space you actually take up in this entire planet, this entire realm of existence. That would be your volume. Volume is measured in terms of grams. Volume is measured in terms of quarts, liters, and cubic meters. Grams is, the common way that we identify. Quarts are the common way we identify volume. Now, the metric system, we use liters to identify volume. In the SI, which is the standard international unit of measurement, we use cubic meters to quantify volume. So when you think of volume, think external. Because volume is the amount of space you take up. So it's dealing with space. It's dealing with the amount of space you take up. Now, when we move on to mass, we see we're dealing with the internal. Because mass is defined as the amount of matter something that is within something. So, if we're talking about you, your mass will be the amount of matter within you. And mass is quantified by pounds, which is the standard, it's the common unit that we use to identify mass. Pounds. How many pounds something has? How many pounds is it? The metric unit that we use to quantify mass is grams. And the standard international unit that we use to quantify mass is kilograms. Move on to energy. Okay, both with energy, first let's define it. Energy is defined as the potential, having the power or ability to do work in order to produce change and transfer heat. Okay, so it deals with work. Another definition is power, which may be translated into motion, overcoming resistance and effecting physical change. The ability or capacity to do work. Now, there's two forms of energy. There's potential energy, which is energy stored. And there's potential energy, which is energy in motion. Kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is energy in motion. Potential energy is energy stored. An example of potential energy would be a glass of water just sitting on the table. Now, an example of kinetic energy would be if we had the same glass and we accidentally tipped it over. Well, kinetic energy deals with energy in motion, so the water movement, when you tip the glass over, that would be your kinetic energy. Energy, the common way to identify energy is calories. Both the common way and utilizing the metric system, we would use calories to identify energy, to quantify energy. Another way we quantify energy is to utilize a standard international unit, which is the joule. Okay, let's move on to temperature. Now, temperature, we see that temperature is defined as the measure of the average kinetic energy of the particles within a sample of matter. It's a measurement. We just talked about kinetic energy and potential energy. Well, temperature is the kinetic energy within within a sample, within the particles of a sample. Some would say, kinetic energy of the molecules in an object or a system. The metric system, utilizing the metric system, we quantify temperature by using Celsius. The standard international unit of measurement to quantify temperature is the Kelvin, and the common unit of measurement that we use is Fahrenheit. Excuse me, I have a lot of cold in my throat today. All right. Now let's think about all the examples and all of the different units of measurement we just talked about. We see that even within the extremely, generic, minute, and mundane, we see the spirit take expression. For example, in order to conceptualize eternity, you must understand length. If you had no concept of length, you wouldn't know how long eternity was, because eternity is forever. So at least to start off, you have to sometimes compartmentalize stuff in order to, well, at least not nowadays, we have to compartmentalize stuff in order to understand it. So in order to conceptualize eternity, we must understand length. To understand all, you must have a concept of volume and mass. For one thing, as we mentioned, volume deals with the amount of space something takes up. Now, to understand our true volume, and understand, how far, how much of a reach we actually have, how much space we actually take up, how far, how much of space our thoughts and our mind power actually takes up in this, in this whole system, this whole universe. We have to understand volume in order to even conceptualize the extent of our minds, the vastness of our reality, of our spirit, of our existence. In order to understand eternity, we must also understand mass and understand our internal. So we have to understand how we affect reality externally. We must also understand, volume helps us understand our reach in the external world. Mass helps us to understand who we are internally. Like, it helps us to understand that we have no true mass because we're all encompassing. We have no true volume because we're all encompassing. Mass deals with how much matter you contain. There's no limit to what's within you. It helps us to understand that there's no limit to amount of matter or whatever is within us. There's no limit to amount of energy and space and the vastness of our internal being. There's no limit to what's within us. But it does help. It does give us an idea of just what we are, how vast we are in our unmeasurability. So, in order to understand how infinite and powerful you actually are, you must have a concept of all three: length, mass, and volume. Another thing, to understand how spirit moves, you must have a concept of energy and its waves of vibration. All things vibrate. And in order to understand how spirit actually moves within this realm of existence, how spirit, acts, you have to understand vibrations and energy, because energy really especially vibrates. The energy is what vibrates everything and moves in a vibration. So all things vibrate. In order to have a concept of the varying degrees of infinity, you must have a concept of temperature. Now, we as physical, on the physical level, as human beings, we identify with everything according to our senses, where we can see, touch, feel, taste, and smell. Well, Understanding the concept of temperature helps us to connect with the understanding of our infinite being through the perception, through the perception of feel. Understanding temperature, it helps us to feel things, to feel ourselves, feel infinity, feel the vastness of our being. Even infinity has varying degrees. All things are varying degrees of the same thing. So, but infinity helps. Temperature helps us to understand the varying degrees within infinity. So now we see why basic math and chemistry are still useful, even though we're using them on the physical level. We see where they're still useful in self-mastery. In order to understand the self, we must use these tools. We must understand volume, mass, all these different concepts of measurement in an esoteric and metaphysical sense. Even though we use them on the physical level every day to do just physical things, they can also be utilized, in order to understand the self. But in order to do that, you have to understand them in an esoteric, metaphysical sense. Although they're just scratching the surface of the tip of the nail, all of these concepts are helpful in understanding our power beyond measure. Now, we're talking about the concept of our unmeasurability. Now let's talk about our indivisibility. Our true selves. We know already that we can manipulate matter on the most basic sense. You can manipulate the length of something by simply cutting it. You can also manipulate volume and mass by doing the same thing. When you cut something, you make it shorter. When you cut something, you also manipulate its mass by because it no longer contains what it originally had. Like when you cut something, the mass is smaller because the amount of whatever was in that object when it was all one is actually becomes less because you divided it up. So now when you divide it into smaller pieces, you actually divide it into a smaller mass. The same thing for volume. When you cut something up, you decrease its volume because it no longer takes up as much space. We also know we can manipulate temperature, of course, by simply turning on a fan or a heater. So we know on the most basic sense that we can manipulate matter and affect physical change, okay? Now, all things being reflections, as written in the Kybalion, as above, so below, as within, so without. All things being reflections, if we can manipulate matter on the most basic sense, we can manipulate matter on the most complex, in the most complex way also. But we're going to talk about that in later videos. This video is for just introducing the concept of your indivisibility and your unmeasurability to you. Just for an end note, let's look at this. Let's think about it. Just like you can manipulate matter, you can manipulate your own vastness with your mind by cutting it into force and expanding it into infinity. Tomorrow we're going to deal with the concept of as above, so below. As above, so below, as within, so without. All this does is deal with reflections, because everything is a reflection of the true self. All things are just reflections of, the self. Peace be with you, and join me for tomorrow and my later videos. Thank you. Y'all have a good day. Bye-bye.